The Honorable John McHugh, the Secretary of the Army. Good to see you, sir. We have a great guest speaker, but before I introduce him, I'd like to make two administrative announcements. First, if you haven't already done so, please remove your badges. We are doing a live streaming video. The second announcement is that if you choose to stand up and ask a question, we ask that you wait for the microphone, then announce your name and your organization before asking the question. All righty, we have a great speaker today, and I was told to make it brief. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 32nd Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General Pete Chiarelli.
Excellent. That's the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you very much. Okay, can I get you to run the film, please?
Hi there, and thank you for your service to our country.
We're so proud of you. You're the best we've ever had. As a veteran, you are part of America's nobility.
I know firsthand the challenges of war.
One of the ugly realities is that sometimes the enemy comes home with you.
Your experiences in combat are so powerful that very few will or can understand what you went through.
I put the war on every morning, and I take it off every night.
In those days, we didn't have the same services and resources and tools
That are available today to help service members and their families
Deal with the challenges of deployment and reintegration.
If you return from combat and have concerns about your mental health,
the tools and the resources are here now.
Do yourself and your family a favor and use them.
ask for help.
Remember your warrior ethos. Refuse to accept defeat. Never quit. Don't let the enemy defeat you at home.
When we were trying to figure out how we were going to try to change the culture of the Army when it came to the hidden wounds of war, we first reached out to who you would expect us to reach out to, and that was sports heroes. There's a lot of similarity, at least on the surface. We don't really know how much, and I'll talk more about that later, between traumatic brain injury and some of the things that we see involved with our soldiers and head injuries that they receive. And the natural tendency was to say, let's go get some NFL players who, and college players who have suffered this and get them to speak up because our soldiers look up to them. But then as I had an opportunity to mix with many of the Medal of Honor recipients and opportunity to talk to them, I found out that many of them suffer from traumatic brain injury and some of them suffer from post-traumatic stress. The one who is most forward in talking about it is one that many of you know named Buddy Buka, who will tell the story at his daughter's wedding. Somebody said something innocuous, and he hauled off and cold-cocked him, grabbed the guy by the scruff of the neck and stuck his head into a table, and his family said, it's time to go get some help. And he had problems for the 20 years that he had been back from Vietnam, and he clearly admitted to us that when he went, it was diagnosed as PTS. If you know anything about PTS, National Institute of Mental Health will tell you the real sad thing is it's 12 years between whatever the event is that causes the PTS and someone seeking help for PTS. And what's really sad about that isn't that it takes 12 years to get the help, it's all the bad things that happen in between. And I'll talk more about that later on. Next slide, please. Now, I wanted to... This is probably different than any leadership forum you've ever had before. I'm not going to talk anything about strategy or where the Army's going. I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about what I think is an issue as I get toward the end of my career, many of you are going to be faced with. And that is these two critical injuries. And we'll talk a little bit about what we've done with the publication of the report on health promotion, risk reduction, and suicide prevention. But this chart kind of sums it up. When I became the 32nd Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, in our AW2 program, which many of you know, our Army Wounded Warrior program, where we have individuals who have a single disqualifying injury of 30% or greater, we had a total of 38% of those individuals had either PTS or TBI. And I leave off the D for reasons that you'll find out later on. I call it PTS. Today, and that was with a population of 3,600, and that was 2 years ago. Today in that program, and again, you have to qualify to be in AW2, you have to have a single disqualifying injury of 30% or greater. We have over 7,500 folks in that program. And as you can see, the numbers are 45% have a single disqualifying injury at PTS and 17% on TBI. The numbers have gone right through the roof. That's for those of you who aren't math majors like I am, I'll do a little math in public. Barbara could do this much quicker than I had, but it's 62% of this population suffer from those injuries. And as you can see, for those in the back, 11% is the next one, and that's amputation. So these are huge issues. And I would argue that the numbers are probably far greater than that when you look at the total population of wounded soldiers. Now, what I'm about to do is give you a tanker's explanation of both of these. I'm not a doctor. I'm a words person. And what you're going to hear here is what a tanker has been able to learn about these two. And I apologize for all the doctors and nurses and other medical professionals in the audience if in any way I misspeak. But I wanted to find a way to explain this to soldiers because I think it's so critical, because these are really hidden wounds, that we find a way to break down the stigma, and we only do that if we understand these things. Now I want to talk about two of them before I talk about the report. Next slide, please. The first thing I want to talk about is traumatic brain injury. This is an interesting slide, and it has proven to be a very, very important slide for some of the work that we've done. This is a picture of 3 brains using a new technology called positron emission tomography. It's about 2.5 years old, where what will happen is you will produce yourself to the doctor, and if he thinks that there's some kind of a brain injury, they will give you some kind of a radioactive concoction mixed with glucose, pump it into your veins, and 20 minutes later take a picture. And as you can see, the brain on the right is a normal brain. I don't know how much you know about the brain. The brain is 2% of your body mass. It burns 20% of the power of the energy your body creates. Mine's probably about 15. Shipman's has got to be up somewhere around 45%, him being a lawyer, or is that 5%? I don't know for sure. That is a normal brain all the way on the right, and it looks like a normal brain. It's burning energy. The brain in the center is an individual who has been comatose for 5 days. We're not missing these soldiers. These are soldiers. Could be a soldier. This one in particular is an individual who's been in an automobile accident. And as you can see, he has been in a hospital bed for 5 days. And when we have that happen on the battlefield, there's no issue there. You're comatose. You're taken immediately and evacuated to whatever level of care you need to go to. I will tell you, the person in the middle totally recovered from this brain injury. But at this particular point, he's been comatose for 5 days. The interesting picture here is the one on the far left. That is a picture of a UCLA football player. And on Saturday, he suffered a head injury, was taken off of that field 100 yards long, 55 yards wide, with cameras from every angle that could chronicle his knock to the head, with doctors that immediately rushed out, with trainers who are used to treating this kind of thing. And they came out, brought him over to the sideline, checked him out, and said, "You're good to go, you haven't had a concussion," and he went ahead and completed that game. As he was changing into his street clothes after the game, one of the trainers came up to him and said, "Listen, if you demonstrate any of the following symptoms, I want you to produce yourself to the emergency room the next morning, if that happens, when you wake up the next morning." And sure enough, this individual woke up the next morning, went to the emergency room at UCLA Hospital, said, "Doc, this is what happened to me." Doc said, "Okay." Took this picture, and you can see the picture of his brain. Now, this is a very revealing picture, because these are the ones we were missing. These are the soldiers who go through and receive a concussion, who, because of our culture and the kind of people we are, basically say, "I'm fine, coach, put me back in the game. I got to stay with my soldiers. I can't leave." I ran into just one of these soldiers here in January, on January 8th, when I went down for the All-American Bowl, which we sponsor every year for high school seniors. And prior to that bowl is a banquet the night before, and I had the opportunity to present a Purple Heart to a soldier that had traumatic brain injury. He relayed his story to me. His platoon sergeant went on EML. He was the acting platoon sergeant, was in an explosion in Afghanistan, felt the effects, but basically was fine, shook it off when the E4 medic came and said, I want to administer the mace to see if you have a concussion. He said, no, you're not going to do that to me. I need to stay with my soldiers. I'm the acting platoon sergeant. 3 days later, he goes through another blast. He was immediately evacuated out of country, and he has TBI. A concussion doesn't mean you're going to get TBI, and I like to differentiate between the two. Lots of people get concussions and have full recoveries. The issue you have is if you get a concussion followed by another concussion before a brain that looks like the one on the far left has returned to look like a brain on the far right that is fully functioning and repaired itself, and that can take anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. That's the issue we're faced with. And that's why we instituted the protocols we instituted downrange. One of the things I'm proudest of is what the team led by Doc Schoonmaker did in changing the way we handle these injuries downrange. Today, if you're downrange and you have one of these injuries and you're in a vehicle that is damaged by an explosion, if you're outside a vehicle within 50 meters of an explosion, if you're inside a building that has an explosion, or if you're command directed, you will be pulled aside at the earliest possible moment. You will be evaluated for concussion, held out of the fight for 24 hours, evaluated a second time to get the UCLA football player effect in the event that your symptoms show themselves 24 hours after the fact. And I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes that shows you the impact that that's had downrange with the first units we've sent. Totally unsolicited impact. Let's show the next slide. This is something that I've added, and I apologize. I should have told those of you who heard me talk about this before, you can get up and leave, because I don't pass an opportunity to talk to leaders where I don't talk about this, because I think it's absolutely so critical that we talk about these hidden, changing that culture. But this is an image of a 23 or 24-year-old soldier who died of other causes. And it is an image of a cutaway of his brain. Now, this soldier endured what are known as multiple blasts in OEF or OIF. The doctor who showed this to me did not know where he was stationed. And you can see the start of what is known as neurodegeneration in these two red circle areas right here. And that is that brownish area you see. Neurodegeneration is characterized by the accumulation of what is known as tau protein that develops following repetitive mild brain injury. Now, I didn't know anything about tau protein 5 days ago, but tau protein is really a good thing in your body. It serves as almost scaffolding that helps pass electrical impulses from the brain. But when the brain has a concussion of some type, and repeated concussions, this protein begins to build up. It was first described in boxers by Harrison S. Martland in 1928, as he was the first full-time paid pathologist in Newark City, and he worked there from 1909 to 1927. Tau protein stabilizes the microtubulars that allow you to pass commands to the different parts of your bodies. But when tau protein becomes defective and can no longer stabilize the microtubulars the way it's supposed to, it can result in dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease. And for those of you who know someone with Alzheimer's disease, this is a real breakthrough. Tau protein was first discovered in 1975, and there's a lot of study going, and as we look at the effects of TBI and tau protein, we're hoping that it will also help folks who have dementia and Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. Now, this is the part that worries me the most, and why I felt that it's necessary to talk to young leaders about this. What you see here are individuals who are suffering from chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The evidence suggests that CTE is associated with repetitive trauma that most commonly occurs in individuals' teens and 20s. And for those of you who have youngsters who play football or still play football yourself, you might want to perk up and listen to this a little bit. There's characteristically a long latent period. The median is 8 years, but it can go anywhere from 0 years to 37 years. Symptoms of CTE are often insidious and begin in the midlife with prominent early personality and behavioral changes and memory loss. The previous slide showed a young soldier that was 23 to 24 years old. The evidence of neurodegeneration characterized by the accumulation of tau protein is small in those earlier pictures I showed you, and that soldier may well have not had any symptoms whatsoever of what you see up here. This slide shows further degeneration and progression of neurodegeneration in a 45-year-old NFL football player and an 80-year-old professional boxer. And what's important here is this latency period, and this is what concerns me with the number of soldiers that we have had who have gone through multiple explosions. The issue is just because you come out of that feeling okay doesn't mean you're going to have problems later on. And this is repeated time and time again when it comes to pro football players. The individual that's up there, I can't use his name. It was given to me in confidence, but it was somebody that at least 80% of the people in here would recognize the name if I would give it to you. He retired from pro football at 28 years of age, very, very successful, showed no signs of anything. Went into a very successful business, was doing quite well, about 8-9 years into it, started to make bad decisions, all of a sudden became irritable, dementia, signs of dementia, and he died in what people expect was a suicide at 45 years of age. So the study of this is absolutely critical, and quite frankly, it's something that concerns me as I look at the kind of injuries our soldiers have had and realize the absolute importance of the work we're doing. You know, the problem with the brain is we just don't know that much about it. And when I talk to people about it, I try to explain, after all the talking explanations we've had to do with WTUs and everything else, it's not like heart surgery. You know, I got to believe if you go in for open heart surgery, basically they're going to cut you in the same place, fold you back in the same place, clamp you in the same place, sew you up in the same place. One doctor may have better hands than the other doctor, use different anti-rejection drugs, do something different, but basically it's going to be about the same. That's not the case when it comes to treating these injuries. We just don't know a lot about them. And I am very, very pleased to see that science is moving ahead with work like this. The issue here is, of course, is if you could, in fact, cause that tau protein to reverse itself. And that's what is being tested right now. And there are a couple of tests going on right now with ways to go ahead and do that. So besides the concern I have, I'm very, very happy to see some of the research that's going on. Now, next slide, please. I put this up here as a promise to show you what the protocols have done. And this was a totally unsolicited email by J.C. Campbell. Many of you know J.C. He was up here for a long period of time, a great combat leader, spent as much time in Iraq and now Afghanistan as anybody that I know. We worked with the 101st Brigades before they deployed. I had a VTC with each one of the brigades of the 101st, explained the new protocols, explained what we were doing when it came to concussions and pulling folks out. There were some tough VTCs because the leaders didn't understand why they were going to have to sit out for 24 hours, worried about what impact it would have on the mission. And as you can see by his email up here, he believes there's over 1,600 soldiers that will not be evacuated out of theater because they have instituted the protocols and have gone above and beyond that, which we knew that they would, and it's having a tremendous effect on him being able to maintain his combat power, but more importantly, take care of his soldiers. Because if a soldier in the 101st has a second concussion, I can pretty well guarantee you that soldier will have totally healed from the first concussion before there is a second blast that he or she goes out and is part of. But this is a good news story, and we're seeing that repeated throughout the theater. Now, before I get into the report, I'm going to try one more because I think it's absolutely essential. As bad and as difficult as TBI is, I think it's important to give you a tanker's explanation of what is PTS, because that is really the injury we see the most of. At 45% of the soldiers with a single disqualifying injury. And it's the hardest one for soldiers to understand. Most of the research that's been done in PTS has been done on women. Between 72 and 74% of women who are sexually assaulted, in fact, have PTS. They develop PTS at some time in their career, in their life. The research that I'm very impressed with, to show you how that is playing out in civilian life, As you will find in many emergency rooms today, there are trained individuals who treat PTS that literally are stationed in emergency rooms. So that when a woman comes into an emergency room and claims to have been sexually assaulted, the treatment begins almost immediately. And it is begun almost immediately because the closer that you can get to the treatment of whatever the initiating injury is, the more successful the treatment is. If this drags out for the 12 years on an average or even longer, it's much, much harder to get at this and to fix what's wrong. And what happens? Now, I'm not going to get